let's check it out. It's 1966, Astrodome, Houston, Texas. 36,000 people in the stand. At the time, it was the biggest audience to ever watch an event at an indoor venue. And to be honest, it kind of makes sense given who they came to see. It was a boxing match between Cleveland Williams, a hometown hero at the time, going against Muhammad Ali, a man that needs no introduction. One of the more interesting side plots of this fight is just how much Muhammad Ali was hated at the time. I mean, we love the dude now, but back then, the whole time the dude was just getting booed. It's probably one of the most forgotten aspects of his career. And what's even more interesting is just how many people expected this to be Ali's toughest opponent yet. Even the announcers for the fight picked Ali to lose. Once the fight started, Williams, his opponent, did look promising for like 20 seconds. He landed the first punch, hook to the head of Ali, and looks good for 20 seconds. After that, Ali destroyed the man, demoralized the man, beat the brakes off them, whatever like synonym you got for just, he got destroyed. And by most accounts, this is his greatest performance. This is actually the first fight where he busted out the Ali shuffle, or that thing where he like looked like he's running but in place, kind of like stun his opponent. This is like the equivalent of like the first time a crossover happened in basketball. It's a monumental moment, bro. Come on, it's the Ali shuffle. It's the Ali shuffle, baby. Anyway, the point is Ali literally destroyed the man. By the end of the second round, Williams had been knocked down 3 times. Once more about a minute into the third, which resulted in the ref calling the fight. What was wild though is how Ali, who was maybe the cockiest human being to ever walk this here earth, did celebrate the win. He just walked back to his corner, took his mouthpiece out, stood there, didn't even smile. And Williams, on the other hand, was a punching bag. Stiff legs, no rotation in his hips, barely moved. Like, bro looked like he had no business being in the same ring as Ali. Not only did he look old, he looked like he didn't know how to box. So you might ask, how could somebody so old and so inexperienced get a shot at maybe the greatest boxer of all time? And that would be a fair question, except for the fact that Williams was neither old or inexperienced. In fact, he was only 33 at the time of the fight, which for many fighters is still in their prime. I mean, just to put it in perspective, Evander Holyfield was 33 when he beat Mike Tyson. Sugar Ray Leonard was 33 when he fought Roberto Duran for the 3rd time. And Floyd Mayweather was 33 when he beat Canelo Alvarez. 3 amazing performances by 3 fighters in 3 different weight classes, all at the age of 33. So if it wasn't age that made Williams look so bad in the ring, I guess that means he was just a bad boxer. I can't even make that argument. Williams was no slouch. Like, the dude actually had quite the resume. Up until this fight, he'd gone 65-5. 65-5. And he was on a 9-fight winning streak coming into this fight. And to my point earlier, a lot of people actually thought Williams could win this fight. So you might ask, if it wasn't age, if it wasn't a lack of experience that made him look so bad, then what was it? And to answer that, we're gonna have to rewind a couple of years. Also, I just want to make a quick interjection. I'm not gonna do like a formal intro in this video because I'm already way too deep into it. But I just want to remind y'all, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're just starting out here, and any support we can get is greatly appreciated. All right back to it. All right, see, aside from being boxers, Ali and Williams shared another thing in common. They were both black. And in the 60s, that didn't make life any easier, regardless of how famous you were. Not that it's any easier now, but you get my point. It was bad back then too. Ali's battle with the US Army is well documented. Long story short, Ali was drafted to fight in Vietnam. Even though he didn't qualify, this eventually reached the Supreme Court, where they ruled in favor of Ali, but during this time, he lost 3 years in the prime of his career, most of his money, and was stripped of his title. As for Williams, his struggle was mostly forgotten. Almost exactly 2 years prior to this fight, Williams was driving when he was stopped near Houston, Texas by a highway patrolman, Dale Whitten, who stated that Williams was driving under the influence. According to the police report, which has since been highly disputed, the officer's gun went off during a struggle to arrest him. The bullet went through Williams' kidney, through his intestines, and lodged against his right hip. Williams ultimately had to undergo 4 surgeries in the next 7 months for colon damage and an injured right kidney, which he later had to have removed. The bullet, however, they couldn't take out, and this caused partial paralysis in his hip muscles. And through all these procedures, according to Williams, he died 3 times on the operating table. The dude died 3 times on the operating table. And during all of this, to add insult to injury, he lost over 60 pounds. That's 60 pounds of muscle for a heavyweight fighter. But what's even crazier is how he put that weight back on. See, he had this manager, Bud Williams, nice guy, great guy, Bud Williams, shout out Bud Williams, who not only offered to cover his medical expenses, which totaled over $63,000 at the time, or over $500,000 when adjusted for inflation in today's money, but he also let him use his farm to get back in shape. And get back in shape, Williams did. To build back all the muscle he lost, he would literally toss 80-pound bales of hay. Dude was literally just picking up bales of hay and just like throwing them. I didn't realize I could get you that level of muscle. I could use some of that. Like, fighting aside, if I put a picture of Williams' physique next to Ali's, you would probably say that Williams looks like the stronger man. The dude's like way more cut, got way more muscle, yada yada yada, all that good stuff. But none of that obviously eventually mattered. The effects from Williams' injuries were prominent. No amount of weightlifting or rehabbing could compensate. I mean, not only was Williams unable to fight, he was barely able to walk. Dude could barely keep his balance after getting hit with a jab. And not only was he physically compromised, emotionally, the guy was in shambles. Because remember his generous manager, Bud Williams, who I mentioned, nice guy, great guy, who let him work out at his farm? Right before walking out to the ring, he told Cleveland Williams that the cost for his operations and rehab were in fact not going to be paid for. And instead, he would be taking the money directly from Williams' purse to cover the expenses. And nearly every penny he made from this fight would now go to pay for his medical expenses that, up until 30 minutes before, he thought were already paid for. Williams' plan was to retire following this fight. This was supposed to be his last hurrah. And he was likely depending on this money to help support his life after boxing. And he still did call it quits, but after falling into financial problems, he turned to the ring for a few more years before ultimately hanging it up for good. And the next few years following his official retirement were not any better. Soon after, he again fell into financial trouble, this time without the ability to fight again. And on top of that, his last remaining kidney failed. Twice a week for the rest of his life, he walked to a nearby Houston hospital where he received dialysis treatment. And on September 3rd, 1999, while walking back from the hospital after receiving his bi-weekly treatment, Williams was hit by a car and pronounced dead on the scene. Boxing is a dirty sport. Corruption is almost as old as the sport itself. Williams should never have been allowed to fight Ali that night. In fact, he should have never been allowed to fight ever again. His health was clearly compromised, but the people around him saw an opportunity to make a good dollar and made sure they walked away with every penny they could before he was damaged goods. And this might be a lot of the reason why Ali didn't celebrate after winning. He knew Williams' circumstances, and to his credit, he never bragged or so much brought up this fight ever again. What's more is just how over a decade later, Ali had nearly the same thing happen to him. By the late 70s, people around Ali started seeing signs of deterioration in his motor skills. At one point, he was cited as not even being able to accurately use his finger to touch the end of his nose. And this was while he was still fighting. But rather than telling him to stop, the people around him saw an opportunity to make the last few dollars they could off Ali's name. In his second to last fight ever, Muhammad Ali went against a young Larry Holmes, and maybe one of the most difficult fights to watch in the history of boxing. And to be honest, it might be the most heartbreaking thing to ever happen in sports. It's so bad that honestly, I'm not even gonna put the B-roll in here. If you know, you know, and if you don't, go look it up by yourself. I don't want to be the reason you saw it. Don't put that on me. Holmes after the fight was emotional. He mentioned how difficult it was to have done what he did to Ali. The cycle continued, even for Holmes. Now at the tail end of his career, and in a similar condition as Ali and Williams, Holmes was defeated by a young Mike Tyson. And towards the end of Tyson's career, in a similar financial strain, he was also forced to fight a few more times in the early 2000s before calling it quits. Alright, so what's the point of all this? The goal of this video isn't to talk about broke boxers or shady agents or any of that. What I actually want to shed some light on is how a lot of these discussions we're having about fighter pay and inequity across boxing and MMA today existed 50, 60, 70 years ago. Fighters getting only a fraction of the money they're owed, getting swindled by promoters or just downright underpaid, and then getting tossed aside like they're scraps at the first sign that their ability to generate income is compromised. Nothing new. That's almost always been the case. The only thing that's changed is how, for the first time ever, we have a single entity we can focus on, scrutinize, and blame, and that's the UFC. Now, let me preface this by saying I do believe that the UFC is a net positive for athletes and sports as a whole. I think there's an unbelievable amount of structure and opportunity a league like the UFC allows for. My dream, my hope for one day boxing to put something together like the UFC. I also believe that without the UFC, there's hundreds of fighters who would not have been able to turn their passions into a career, allowing them to get paid, fight on the biggest stages while getting exposure and recognition, which in itself is a real currency. But that doesn't absolve them of their wrongdoings, especially as it relates to fighter pay and equity, both during and after these fighters' careers. But just before we get into that, I want to put into context just how brutal a sport this is. The UFC and MMA as a whole are different than most other combat sports in that, simply put, you can do almost anything. The restrictions that other combat sports have don't exist in MMA. Boxing, you can only use your fists. Wrestling, you can only grapple. MMA has none of these restrictions because in its very nature, it brings all of these combat sports together. Called mixed martial arts for a reason, it's in the name. And because of the lack of restrictions, fighters are susceptible to a broader range of injuries. The worst of these, of course, being head and brain injuries. The American Journal of Sports Medicine found that nearly 32% of UFC fights end with one fighter suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. The TBI rates in mixed martial arts are twice as high as those in football, 3 times higher than boxing, and 8 times higher than hockey. We think of football and boxing as two of the most violent sports, especially with regards to head injuries, and neither come even remotely close to the damage caused by MMA. But the worst part about head injuries are the long-term effects that don't appear right away. That's what's so dangerous. If I tear an ACL, I can address that immediately. If I break a bone, I can get treatment right away. Brain injuries are much scarier because of the delayed response. A punch today may not affect you for another decade, meaning you could go an entire fighting career and not realize the damage caused until it's way too late. But regardless of the injury, be it a broken bone or severe brain damage, due to their status as independent contractors, fighters still have to pay for a lot of their treatment, irrespective of whether the damage happens inside the ring or not. As it stands, the UFC only formally offers medical benefits for fighters on the active roster who experience immediate injuries as a result of fights or training camps. Seeing this, several former UFC athletes are taking a stand by suing the league, claiming it unfairly used its superior marketing position to suppress athlete pay and avoid paying payroll taxes, workers' compensation costs, and other benefits it would otherwise be required to pay if athletes were considered employees rather than independent contractors. Whether or not this lawsuit will be successful is up in the air, but if nothing else, it continues to add pressure to the organization. And we've seen this work before. The US women's soccer team recently had a landmark victory where they are now receiving equal pay to their male counterparts. WNBA has continued to make progress on that front too, and even the NCAA recently gave in to similar pressure, now allowing athletes to make money on their name, image, and likeness. In fact, there's a pretty legitimate argument that the UFC is almost as bad as the NCAA. And I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. The NCAA is notorious for not paying athletes anything while raking in billions each year, but the UFC isn't too far behind. The UFC on average pays fighters somewhere between the range of 10 to 15% of revenues each year. This is a comparison to all the other major leagues, the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, the NFL, who all have near 50-50 splits in revenues between athletes and the organizations. The UFC, on the other hand, pockets 90 cents of every dollar, meaning on the spectrum, the UFC is closer to paying nothing, like the NCAA, than paying what all of these other leagues do. No benefits, barely any money from sponsorships, and almost none of the revenue generated by the league. At least those athletes get full healthcare, housing, food, and some form of an education. And look, I know it's not as bad, but again, when you put everything on a spectrum and you say all the other leagues are here and the NCAA is here, the UFC falls much closer to the NCAA than all these other leagues. That's just the argument that I'm making. The NCAA is on a level of hell on its own. That's a whole separate discussion. So, all right. Well, what's the point of all this? Well, the point I want to get across is that this movement we have brewing against the UFC is long overdue. Everything I mentioned that was wrong with the UFC is just as bad across all combat sports. I get that. But the difference here is that for the first time, we have a single entity we can critique. A single entity that's by far and away the most popular organization across all combat sports. And an organization whose actions can quite literally influence the future of all combat sports. The UFC can set the standard because it is the standard. If they begin providing even the slightest amount of benefits, be it healthcare, pensions, anything they can incorporate, it can set the standard for combat sports as a whole and create a situation where all fighters can continue to chase their dreams, find a means of supporting their families, and build up some equity in the process so they can live beyond their fighting years. And most importantly, so there isn't another Cleveland Williams, or Muhammad Ali, or Larry Holmes, or the hundreds of other fighters who gave us so much joy and received nothing in return. The UFC has revolutionized combat sports, made it accessible to the world, made fighting cool again, and in the process built a hell of a business. It gave us what we always wanted, a single organization focused on giving fans the best experience, the best fights, the best cards. They changed the game for us. Now it's time to do the same for the athletes. Alright y'all, thank y'all so much for making it through another video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're just starting out here and any support we can get is greatly appreciated. I appreciate y'all for real. Thank you so much for all the support, all the love, and all the positivity. Have a great rest of your day. Love y'all. The funny thing about this fight, among other things, like it's a very iconic fight, but probably one of the craziest like backstories to it all, and a lot of the reason why Ali whooped him so quickly, like so brutally and fast, and ended the fight as fast as he did. There's a long running superstition in and around, especially boxing, that you're not supposed to empty the pipes. Yeah, as a man, you're not supposed to empty the pipes prior to your fight. And Ali unfortunately got a little too excited the night before the fight, and he might have emptied the pipes. He was panicking, right? The dude was panicking. And so he calls up his manager, his agent, Bob Arum. He's like, yo, fam, I was just with a very beautiful woman, and I thought I could control myself, and I couldn't. And I emptied the pipes. Whatever shall I do? Dude was panicking. He thought it was over for him. And so Bob Arum, just like some quick thinking, was like, yo, this is what you about to do. Before your fight tomorrow, we're going to crack six eggs, and we're going to put them into a cup, and you're just going to chug 6 eggs. And so that's what he did. And so and then he looked at him before the fight. He's like, listen, I don't know if you have the stamina anymore to last the full fight, so you need to beat him fast. And so that's why the fight went by as quick as it did, because Ali was panicking that he wouldn't have the stamina long term because he emptied the pipes. Moral of the story is, if you ever empty the pipes, just chug 6 eggs. And I guess you're good about, like, I wonder what happens if you don't empty the pipes and then you just chug 6 eggs. Does that give you like superpowers? Do I just become Superman? Do I just become Spider-Man? Do I just become Batman? I mean, we can all be Batman, right? Batman just rich. See, I'm trying to be rich too. Subscribe to this YouTube channel so I can get rich. Oh man.